All right. Welcome to this week's Tech Talk, where we are focusing on how to spot fake news. We'll give folks just a couple of minutes to show up. This is part of our Tech Talk series that we've been having here at the library for quite a number of months at this point, where we offer things on Facebook Live. We also have our Appy Hour sessions. So those are sessions where we talk about apps, generally free apps that you're able to put on your own devices. But today is one of our Tech Talks. Our Tech Talks are timely technology topics, technology lectures, where we talk about current news articles, current things that are in the news, which fake news seems particularly poignant after the last week or so. So we'll wait just a few moments and then we'll get started. We have done this session in the past. I believe that we did this in late October, but this has been updated a little bit from that session. Additionally, any of the Facebook Live events, so our Tech Talks or our Appy Hour sessions, are available for you to rewatch on Facebook, as well as on the library's YouTube channel as well. So if you have missed some of our sessions, you want to go back and see, I know last week Jackie talked about meditation apps, for example. Maybe that's one of your New Year's resolutions. You can certainly check that out, both on Facebook and on the YouTube channel as well. You can also send this to friends and family who might find it interesting too. So I think we will dive into our topic. So this is how to spot fake news. My name is Anne. I'm one of the 2 technology trainers who run this program. My coworker Jackie also does a number of our programs, so you may hear her voice on a number of those programs if you check them out. But the first thing we should mention is that fake news, or rather the ability to differentiate between fake news or misinformation, disinformation, is not a political issue. Disinformation and fake news affects everybody. It has significant impacts on the choices that we make. It has significant impacts on kind of our worldview as well. And it really is another form of literacy, being able to decipher whether or not this information that you're being told is accurate or not. So fake news at its core, we use the kind of catchphrase fake news mainly because it gets you to click on this video, but it has become shorthand for misinformation. So information that misrepresents the facts, to evoke an emotional reaction, and especially now, encourage sharing. So this can be in the form of satire, something that's funny that you want to share. This can be sensationalism, so something that seems too good to be true or seems too bad to be true, that inspires you to share it either on Facebook or with friends and family on a different social media platform. It can also just be plain false as well. We'll talk about the different forms of fake news moving forward, but it is a misrepresentation of the facts, and the reasons why vary, of course. One, you can make money off of fake news. We see this a lot when we talk about false connections, those clickbait headlines that make you want to see what the celebrity looks like 20 years later. When you click on a link, there is advertising revenue in play. So fake news can make people money. It also creates a power dynamic. So maybe you are misrepresenting another political group's views in order to advance your own. It can also be entertainment. The Onion, the satirical news site, is funny. It's funny to read these kind of satirical takes on things. There have also been cases where Fake news sites have been created kind of to prove a point that some people will fall for this fake news for entertainment value, which isn't great, but it happens. And finally, there's also just plain old sloppiness. Somebody shared something online, maybe it was satirical, maybe it was just false information, and it spreads widely because no one actually double checks it. This is what we see a lot on social media sites where somebody states their opinion and it's shared as fact then, and can even make its way into mainstream journalism as something that's true when it's not actually true. It's also worth noting that while fake news has kind of become part of our jargon in the last 5 years or so, it's nothing new. Misinformation has been around for as long as we've been talking to each other, essentially. You misrepresent facts, you lie, you tell people inaccurate information. This is an old concept. But why we're hearing about it so much more is because of the internet. So the internet, this wonderful thing that allows you to watch me talk about this in the comfort of your own home, on your own devices, has made it easier, faster, and cheaper to spread misinformation, to spread any information, but especially misinformation. The internet doesn't have anyone policing it. It doesn't have anyone double checking to make sure information is true. Google doesn't do it. Facebook doesn't. Well, Facebook sort of tries now. But misinformation can be spread very easily, very, very quickly through the internet. So that's why we're talking about it. Now, there are a variety of forms that misinformation or fake news can take. This information is from firstdraftnews.org, which is a really, really great organization. They have a ton of information specifically focused on journalists, but really is applicable to anyone who's interested in fake news, understanding where this has come from, what types of forms it has. So I'd definitely recommend checking them out if you're interested in this topic. But they have this scale of the types of misinformation from low impact to high impact, or kind of the severity of degrees. So satire or parody, it's for fun. It's to fool people. It's not really to cause harm. A funny headline you see on The Onion or Reductress or any of those satirical blogs, it's just to poke fun at a situation, a person, etc. We also have false connections. So this is generally kind of a clickbait headline, a very exaggerated headline. But when you actually read past it or look past maybe that big splashy picture at the top of the article, it has decent information. It doesn't really represent what is in the content of the article. And it doesn't match up. It's that false connection. There's also misleading content. So this takes quotes maybe out of context or truncates them. Maybe it's misleading graphics. So maybe the scale of a graph doesn't kind of misrepresents what the graph is actually saying. We also have false context, in which the content, the actual information is real, but it's used in a misleading way. These might be pictures that exist that are from real events, but they're being used to represent a different event. Maybe this has to do with crowd size or protests or people being in certain places. So the picture's real, the context isn't. There's also imposter content. This has become really easy again with the internet. You can search the BBC logo on Google Images and slap it on a news article and claim that it's from the BBC. So this is impersonating people or news organizations. Maybe it's taking somebody's Twitter username and putting it on a fake tweet. That kind of ties into manipulated content. So this is where genuine information or imagery is manipulated, photoshopped, altered videos. Maybe it's slowed down to make the person's speech sound slurred, or they're even deep fakes. So computer programs that can basically take somebody's picture and overlay it on a moving video image to make it look like the person is there, but they're actually not. And finally, there is fabricated content. This is the fakest of fake news. It is completely fake. It is created completely from scratch. There's no original information in there. It was designed to deceive and to do harm. Now, maybe not necessarily harm the way we might think of it. There is a classic viral video of a pig swimming through the water to rescue a goat. That was created entirely for a Comedy Central show. The pig did not actually rescue the goat, but that's an example of a little bit more relaxed fabricated content. So now that we understand some of the different types of content that we might come across that's fake, that's misinformation, it's not telling the true story, we need to dive into why we fall for this, because we all have. It might have been a funny article that you shared, a cute picture, but the reason that we fall for this fake news, especially now, is a combination of two things. It's our brains, it's the way our brains are actually wired, and it's also social media. I realize it's ironic that I'm saying that as I'm talking on Facebook, though. So the first thing we'll take a look at is the way our brains are wired, which is this lovely little thing called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias means that when we hear things that align with what we already believe, we greatly overvalue that versus information that contradicts what we already believe. If you believe that the Cleveland Cavaliers are the best basketball team ever, you aren't going to like when somebody says that some other team is the absolute best team ever. It's kind of a simplistic version, but it's how our brains are wired. We're designed to kind of stay with the groups that we're associated with. Along kind of the same lines is what's called an echo chamber. So social media has really amplified this because social media prioritizes information based on an algorithm. There's a computer program that runs behind the scenes that basically chooses what information is most prominent on your Facebook feed or your Twitter feed. And it wants to give you things that you like. So the stories that you like and comment on, that influences what you're going to see in the future. So if you tend to only interact with liberal news stories, you're only going to get liberal news stories on your Facebook feed. And because that's reinforcing your own beliefs, you kind of get deeper and deeper into this echo chamber. You never hear of anything outside of your little bubble. Also important with social media is it's kind of mixed our ability to differentiate between information coming from friends and family, who are generally very trusted sources. We trust our friends and family's opinions on a wide variety of things, including their opinions on news. But if you're reading a news story right next to a picture of a family member's baby, it's kind of hard to switch our brains from, oh, she's so adorable, I can't wait until I can see her, and thinking critically about that news story. So it's very tough for our brains to switch back and forth. So we tend to just default to, honestly, what's easiest, which is we kind of believe everything we see on Facebook because it aligns with our own beliefs, because it's being given to us within that echo chamber, and it's just easier to say yes to things next to cute pictures of babies and puppies. Now, what you can actually do about fake news and misinformation is just be aware. You're going to come across it. It may not be entirely fake. There may just be some sort of bias to it, but there are important things to pay attention to as you are consuming your news media. Number one thing that I would recommend is if you realize you are having an emotional reaction to the information you're seeing, not just anger necessarily, maybe it's a really, really funny story, you really, really hope it's true, like Sean Hannity getting his pasta pass being taken away from Olive Garden, or maybe it is something that makes you incredibly sad or incredibly angry. That's an emotional reaction. If you remember all the way back to the beginning when we defined fake news, that's its goal. It wants to get an emotional reaction out of you because it activates our lizard brain and basically bypasses our ability to think critically about it. This is the same reason that we fall for scams, which we'll talk about actually, I think next week we'll talk about scams. But if you can convince people to not think rationally, to just share this information, it's super important, it made me feel super emotional, then fake news is working. So if you recognize you are having an emotional reaction to this news article, or it just doesn't seem right, it seems too good to be true, it seems too bad to be true, we want to engage in something called lateral reading. This is what fact checkers, professional fact checkers actually do. And that means we don't dive deeper into the source. We don't read that entire article and the next article and the next article, because you're just kind of digging yourself into a hole, kind of opening yourself up to the bias potentially of that source. Instead, we want to take a step back, take a look at some of the basics of that article, open up a new tab, and search its claims. See if that information has been referenced elsewhere. This is kind of verifying your sources, making sure you can find this information in another location, in another publication. You can also see if other fact checkers have actually talked about this. So these are a couple of examples of fact-checking websites. So checking to see what professionals have done, what information they have out there about the news article that you're personally reading. So this includes factcheck.org, All Sides, which actually is a cool source in that it shows how a story is being reported from a variety of political viewpoints. So they will have a headline from a left-leaning news source, a center-leaning news source, and a right-leaning news source typically. And you can kind of compare the language and become familiar in some of the tropes or some of the biases that you see in these headlines and you see in these articles. So I know it's kind of hard to read some of these and it doesn't have the URL, the web address. So I am going to drop these in the chat so you can check them out if you want. Did they link? They did link. Yay. So All Sides is kind of a cool thing to take a look at. The Washington Post fact checker has those little Pinocchios that will rate things on a Pinocchio scale. This is considered independent from the Washington Post, so they will fact check even their own reporters. PolitiFact has become very familiar to a lot of folks. They have their little truth-o-meter that goes back and forth, showing if something is accurate or pants on fire. Snopes is one of the big names in urban legend debunking, but they have done a ton of work on viral posts, social media posts, Facebook posts. So if you see something going around that says, if you copy and paste this, Facebook doesn't have access to your pictures, Snopes has debunked that several times, but they also do political things too. Media Bias Fact Check is an amateur resource, so it's not from like professional journalists or anything like that, but it is a really long list of news sources and their individual biases and quality of reporting. Plus, they do regular fact checks on big stories as well. So that's another place to take a look. Something also to keep in mind to break out of that echo chamber, or at least be aware of your own biases, your own confirmation bias, is to be aware of where you're getting your news sources. So sources they're good sources and bad sources, essentially. And this chart that's coming up here rates them from most reliable to totally unreliable, reports entirely inaccurate information. And we do see kind of a parabola where the most reliable sources tend to be kind of in that neutral range. So these are professional journalists doing original reporting. They are on the ground, they're reporting what they're seeing. And then as we get kind of toward the more extreme ends of the political spectrum, this goes left for liberal, right for conservative in terms of the American political context. The quality kind of drops off as you become more and more extreme. You get more and more fake news, misinformation. I know this is super, super tiny. So let me see if I can zoom in. So up here at the top, we do have things like AP and Reuters, the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel is a news source. It is a source. NPR, ABC, so a lot of network news is located in that kind of top category. So keep that in mind as you're seeking out these news sources. It's also something to keep in mind as you're looking at news sources that people are posting or articles that are being posted on Facebook. So if you recognize a news source, that's actually probably a good sign if you recognize the source. And if you recognize that it's one of these reputable news sources that does original reporting, I'm more inclined at that point to trust it than if it's some no-name website that I've never heard of before. That doesn't mean that there can't be opinion pieces, for example, in places like the New York Times or the Washington Post. Their newspapers, they have opinion sections. Those aren't necessarily vetted by reporters or doing original reporting. So keep that in mind. If you see opinion across the top, that is someone's literal opinion. I will also put the link to this chart because I know it's really, really tiny. It's really hard to read. They actually have an interactive version at adfontismedia.com. I just put that link in the chat. And also, I should mention, if you have questions as we go through this, although we're almost finished, you can put those in the chat. I'll try and respond to them. But I think actually we're on our last slide. So are there any questions? Is there anything that you have come across as you've been around on the internet that you've had issues identifying fake news, or you've fallen for fake news? You've seen people that you care about falling for fake news? You can definitely put those in the comments. There is also, I will include a link again in the comments because that's where we're putting stuff, to a blog post from my coworker Joe. He put together a blog post. It's actually been shared a couple of times on the Facebook page in the last couple of days or last week or so, of how to spot fake news and looking at media bias specifically. So you can take a look at that as well if you like things that are written down. That links to a really good article from All Sides, actually, about the different forms that media bias can take in journalism. So if you have any questions, you can just put them in that chat box. I'll stick around for a little bit. Basically, the main takeaways are combating misinformation is up to us, up to you, the individual, to be aware of the information you're consuming and kind of work against your brain's natural tendencies. There we go. Natural tendencies of wanting to believe everything that confirms your own beliefs, and also kind of breaking out of that echo chamber that we've become really familiar with social media. Even if that article is next to a cute picture of a baby or a kitten or a puppy, turning on that critical brain, reading the headline, reading past the headline, and if information doesn't seem quite right, even if it does seem right, using lateral reading across sources, getting kind of a fuller picture of what's going on. That's where something like All Sides is really helpful, where it shows all of those different perspectives. That's how to spot fake news and how to deal with fake news, how to protect yourself against fake news, is just think critically, put in the work. It's not an easy answer, unfortunately. So, looks like I don't see any questions right now, so we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Like I mentioned at the beginning, these Tech Talks and Happy Hour programs are available on Facebook after they're finished, so you can send this to someone if you would like. You can also check them out on our YouTube channel. They aren't up immediately afterwards like they are on Facebook, but they're usually up within a couple of days. And you can check out all of the different cool videos that we have there too. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.